Hello everybody, we're doing Leonardo da Vinci at last this week, or this month I should say. Leonardo da Vinci, he's famous for so much. We're going to get into him. 1452 to 1519 is when he lived, and this is a self-portrait. He was born, actually, Leonardo di Ser Piero on April 15th, tax day of 1452. Which of course is before Columbus sailed the ocean blue, in the town of Vinci, Florence, Italy. So what's interesting is that his name as we know him today is actually Leonardo da Vinci, which means that he is from Vinci, Italy. So he's basically Leonardo from that town. His artistic talent was apparent at a really early age. So he became an actual apprentice at the age of 14, and by the age of 20 had his absolute own studio, which is quite remarkable. He was alive during the Renaissance period, which of course, who has Renaissance Day at the school? I believe, who has Renaissance Day, Josh? Which class?
I don't know.
Well, there's a Renaissance Day where they get to go. At any rate, it was the Renaissance then, which was from the late 1400s to the late 1500s. So he was smack in the middle of the Renaissance period and really helped create everything that was there. It was known as the Renaissance because it was a time when people made really great strides with discoveries about nature and art and medicine and much more. He was really a true Renaissance man. You can see here that he was a brilliant artist that people really acknowledged and realized that he was one of the best. He was also a very dedicated scientist and inventor. He was a sculptor, a musician, a mathematician, an engineer, an architect. He did everything. He had a true understanding of the natural environment and tried to explain it through his work. Can you imagine being a scientist? This is where you can talk to the kids and ask them, what would it be like to be able to do all of those things and do it well and be known for them? And then what would that be like, and what problems might you face? Would people believe what you were discovering, or would they think that you were a nutcase? Moving on. He was not allowed to actually get any formal education because his mom and dad were not married. However, that wasn't good enough for him. He was super curious, so he began to do his own self-education. Abraham Lincoln was a person that wasn't ever given any formal school education, self-educated himself. He was in a constant search for knowledge. Most of his education was through the power of observation and experience. Watch what happens and then experience it to learn from it and make predictions on how things would go. Can you imagine, this is where we can talk to the kids, can you imagine not being able to go to school? What would you do? How would you learn? How would you make something of yourself to learn and make a living and be able to afford food? This is a sketch that he did called 5 Grotesque Heads. And it's really quite interesting and very fine with an incredible amount of details. We're going to get to it, but you're going to see here with the nature and the details and the faces and the use of lines to create shadows. Portraiture was a very important art form during the Renaissance period. The typical Renaissance period used what was called a profile or a 3/4 view. It's not really a side view. The person's just turned slightly at the camera. It was considered to show the best view of somebody that was in an actual portrait. It generally had some symbols in the background about what this person was all about. Here you can see a countryside, there was a river, so you might be able to deduce that this person possibly lived in the countrysides of Italy. What was fun is that they used a lot of light and dark shadows. You had dark shadows in here with the light coming down on her. You can kind of envision the sunshine coming down this way onto her. This right here is the only Da Vinci painting that is displayed in the United States of America, and it's actually hanging in Washington, D.C. This right here is quite possibly the most famous painting in the world. It is the Mona Lisa, and it was painted from 1503 to 1507. He was in Florence when he actually painted this. He kept the painting for himself. This was not one that he actually put on display, and he constantly continued to work on it for the rest of his life. Although it's considered one of the greatest masterpieces, Leonardo likely would have considered this painting totally unfinished and not quite ready to go, which is kind of interesting. It now hangs in the Louvre in Paris, France, and it's heavily guarded behind thick bulletproof glass with crowds of people that come and see it every single day. So then we're going to get into some Italian, so I'm sorry for those of you that do speak it well. But he used his signature, what's called smoky style, which is called sfumato. And that right there is was different from anything else from the time. So you can see here that there's kind of a haze to it. It's not a crisp, clear, you don't see actual lines. It's like there's a little bit of smoke coming in. In addition, what it would do is it involved many layers of color, and it softened the outlines and details to create a mysterious mood, or chiaroscuro, or a light, dark, sharp contrast between the shadow and where it was coming. Again, you see the light on her face with the darkness around her body here. It makes them look rounded and more three-dimensional. So if he thought that this was unfinished, what do you think he would have added to actually keep it to be finished? You can explore that. So this is where it starts to get interesting. He made over 8,000 pieces of handwritten manuscripts and drawings that still survive today, all these years later. He wrote down in different notebooks, and there's special kind of shorthand that actually went backwards. We write left to right. He wrote right to left. Why do you think he did this? Do you think it was easier because he was left-handed to write this way instead of this way and not smudge anything? Remember, they didn't have pens and pencils. Perhaps he was using a quill and it would smear if he brought his hand across it, so it was easier to go this way. In this sketch, what's really interesting, you see two totally different ideas. This guy's constantly thinking and just getting it out on paper. So what you see here is you see one is, again, that three-quarter portrait over here, and then down here you see an architectural sketch, which looks like some sort of turret with a castle or a church or something here. It's a study for the Apostle James the Greater and architectural sketches. When you come here, again, he was an observation drawer, so he would observe these leaves and then draw and acorns and then draw it out. He studied anatomy and botany to truly understand the physiology of the human body. And again, he starts to play with what it looks like. This is essentially the same drawing, but here you have shadows, and in this one there's less shadows. It's just the definition of what's going on. He was driven by the guiding principle of observations and experience. And a lot of his times he would just observe and draw and experiment with his different designs to see what might work, what won't work. You can see here where he would do a helicopter. He would draw it out and then make notes next to it about what was going on and how it would work. Here, this is another flying machine that he did. Most of his machines were never actually built. In fact, his ideas were so advanced that they didn't even have the technology to build it. So again, he would put down what the purpose of each one was and sketch into it. He made weapons as well. This was an armored car that would go around so that you wouldn't get hurt. These are mortars and bombshells that would explode out of a cannon in midair and then come down, which is exactly what they ended up building later for cannons in the Neapolitan Wars. Over here you have the giant crossbow with all of the notes onto the side. So what's interesting is this right here is a component that's inside of this weapon. And then he says, okay, this is how you build this in here, and this is how you build this part here, and this is the greater catapult over here that would come down. So super interesting. He loved to do safety devices. He built a parachute or sketched a parachute. What do you think this one is? It's a life preserver with the donut around it. These are all things that have now come into existence that he began to actually explore in his mind and actually write detailed notes about. He loved animals. He loved nature. He actually loved animals so much that he actually became a vegetarian, and when he would go to open market, he would get caged animals and then release them back into the wild birds, that is, not animals, birds. Here's another flying machine that he did, and you can see some more notes up at the top. He did tons and tons of sketchbooks, and it almost became a record of his life and his fascination with science and invention. He had so many ideas, so do you think he would still be known today if he didn't keep a sketchbook? My guess is probably not. Mona Lisa was very famous, but I think a lot of his inventions and stuff is what kind of got him out there and famous. I don't think he would be known for as much as he is known for without those sketchbooks. You can ask the kids, do they have any type of journal or sketchbook to keep their ideas in? And then, now that you've seen this, is this something that you would want to do? Keep a diary of your ideas. This right here, going back to portraiture, is known as a study. It's kind of like a practice drawing, and frankly, if I could practice draw like that, I wouldn't be working. Prior to beginning a painting, he would actually draw a study to find the perfect final image, and then based off the drawing, he would then paint what he was trying to get to. Look at the level of detail here. I mean, you see strands of hair and the curls, you see the neckline here, beautiful shadows where the light is casting down and casting a shadow. Do you think this drawing is finished? Why or why not? Do you think DaVinci would think it's finished? How does the girl's expression make you feel? And then really, what kind of background would you put in this? These are all things that gets you start to thinking. So if you look at it, that sketch there is very reminiscent of this one right here. So you see the type of background. There's some rocks. It's in an arch, so it's Madonna of the Rocks, Virgin of the Rocks. So it's a very religious overtones. In 1482, he moved to Milan to serve as the painter and engineer to the Duke. He worked in Milan for 17 years and served as an architect to design the Italian military weapons. During his time, while he was busy inventing, he created one of his most famous paintings, which is this one right here. What do you see in the painting? How can you tell about it? You can get into the analysis if you choose to. Probably not for the younger kids. This is again one of his most famous portraits. This is called The Last Supper, and it has to do with Christianity. You've got Jesus Christ in the middle with the disciples on either side. If you notice here, this was done as a commission for the monks of Santa Maria del Grassi. That was a mural that was on their dining hall. Jesus is slightly larger than the rest and has a bright red cloak, which brings you to the focal point of his drawing. And that is the most important part of an artwork. Whether it's an apple, whether it's Jesus, whether it's a tree, whether it's a house, it doesn't matter. That's the focal point that comes in and draws you in. This was a self-portrait he did right before his death in 1515. It's red chalk on paper, and it's currently in Italy. He drew it just 4 years before he died. He died in 1519 at the ripe old age of 67, which back then was super, super old. He never did marry. So the question is how do you think he inspired others? How could your artwork inspire others? And then what do you find most fascinating about Leonardo da Vinci? Was it his inventions? Was it his artwork? Was it his love of nature, observation? He was extremely progressive for the time. So that's Da Vinci in a nutshell, and we'll get on to the projects later.